here with psychotherapist Stella O'Malley for our iKydz podcast.
My name is Stella O'Malley and I'm a psychotherapist. I'm based in Birr in County Offaly in the Midlands. And I mostly see a lot of different people I have a private practice, but I see a lot of parents and I see a lot of teenagers who come to me for counselling and psychotherapy.
What is the connection between your practice and the internet and the way the internet has gone?
Well, I suppose the internet is everywhere, and therefore it just comes in it's as common as school at this stage as a reference point. So you hear about it all the time. You know the way teenagers would come into me with problems with school, and teenagers would come into me with problems what happened online. And so many, I'd give a lot of talks for schools, so many schools are very agitated about parents coming in saying, do you see what she wrote at 2 a.m. this morning? And the teachers are saying, we have no jurisdiction over 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning. And yet that comes up an awful lot.
Common has a problem, and the bullying, horrible stuff, yeah?
It comes up a lot. Obviously there's some great stuff about the internet and they learn an awful lot, and I use it an awful lot, and I'm very fond of my phone and my computer. But yeah, there's a huge issue. There's loads of big issues, and it's not just bullying. People think it's only bullying. It's not just bullying. There's a few that come to mind. There's a kind of a vacuous, kind of continuously, almost addiction, but I'd say addiction is a strong word, a kind of habitual turning to your screen every 3 seconds because you've got no sense of, no ability to concentrate. And effectively, that sounds nothing, but actually it's huge. That if you can't read a book, you can't watch a film, you can't talk to somebody without grabbing your phone or without going online on some level, it's a very bad habit that seeps into everything, and we all know people like that.
And would you say that it's a headline grabber, or is it actually a majority of people, or majority of young people who are veering that way?
Oh, it's the majority. It's the majority. I know people sometimes say it's overstated, and I actually don't think it is. I really don't. I think there's a huge issue. What would most commonly come up for me would be teenagers who are worried about their online behaviour. And the teenagers, it's quite noticeable among the genders, and these are sweeping generalisations, and yet it's quite noticeable, so I'll say them anyway. Boys tend to get very worried about their porn, how much porn they view, and they're very worried about, they get addicted to porn, they get very worried. It's a multi-billion euro industry, the porn industry, and so they're kind of lured into behaviour that, in fairness, I'm 43, boys of my generation did not get lured in because they just had, let's say, magazines, or they just had films. It wasn't an eternal scroll, it wasn't an eternal feed. And that's the issue. I've no problem with them watching porn, as I would be very clear to say it to them. It's being addicted, and it never shuts up, it never stops, it's continuously accessible. That's a rabbit hole boys fall down. And they come in and they say things like, I know so-and-so in the class is addicted, and I know so-and-so, but they don't say it's secret. I feel for them. They're mortified, and they're genuinely, I would say they're genuinely kind of sickened with themselves, or they've a lot of distaste for it. While the girls go a completely different way, I would argue. I'm not saying that they don't view porn or watch porn, but what they come in worried about, to me, as a psychotherapist, would be they come in worried about an empty, very appearance-based kind of social media appearances. So they might go online and they might do their makeup or do their hair a certain way, and then do 7,000 million pictures, a million poses, go through, scrolling through. This is all taking hours. Scrolling through, picking the right photo, putting it up, checking how many likes they got, worried sick that, they got, 375 likes while your woman got 480. Constantly comparing their likes with other people's and their shares and their snaps, and then doing it all again, wiping the makeup off, putting a new style of makeup on, a new top, a new hair, and doing it again. And it's incredibly vacuous and superficial. And interestingly, if you look at yourself all the time, if the consequence of looking at yourself all the time it's a royal road to anxiety. That's where you go to. So while it might seem, sure, she's just putting on a bit of makeup and a few pictures, it's much darker than that, in my opinion.
Now, that is a gender split. What about an age split? What ages are we talking about that this is beginning to creep in at?
Okay. That's quite interesting. I think, at 9 and 10, there's an awful lot of kids who are online who probably shouldn't be, well, who definitely shouldn't be in my view. And then as it gets older, at about 12 or 13, I feel the boys, they fall into their Xbox and they don't come out until they're 15 or 16. And a lot of those boys, I would say, they would argue with me that I prefer my friends online, I prefer myself online, I'm witty online, and so are my friends wittier online. And therefore, back off, I've no problem. And then when they come out at 16, they've very few social skills. They haven't been kissed, but they're some sort of connoisseur sexually online, but they actually have done nothing with themselves beyond whatever they've done in the safety of their own room. They've done very little in a disco or with another person. And then suddenly they do want actual in real life experiences, and they've very little social skills. While with the girls, it starts with kind of hearts and glitter, and my own girl is 10, and you can see she wants to do these photos and put rabbit ears, and it all looks very innocent and very sweet, and it is, but I'm incredibly conscious, continuously looking at yourself. It's not a good thing to do. It's not, Narcissus, he looked in the lake and he fell into the lake. Narcissism is a deeply disturbing place to be. And all these girls continuously looking at themselves. It seems very sweet at 9 and 10. By 11 and 12, it's okay. By 13, it's become very narcissistic, very anxious, and very disturbing.
You counsel parents about their kids as well. Can you actually talk to kids about using, and more importantly, not using their smartphones all the time? Or are you just talking to the wall?
Yeah, you're on a hiding to nothing, I'd say, talking to kids and saying, put your phone down. I think you kind of have to be more complex than that. I think you have to be more sophisticated than that insofar as you could lure them into real life. You know what I mean? With activities, with interesting life. But if you're just going to say, put your phone down, put your phone down, put your phone down, it's like don't smoke, don't have sex, don't kiss boys, don't go to disco, don't get drunk. You're kind of going to have to up your game really with that, I think, and lure them into doing stuff that is more interesting.
I am intrigued by to lure. How do you lure kids?
Yeah, it's not easy. And we've got a massive industry that's luring them onto their screens. So you kind of, you do have to set limits. You do have to, I think, make them, yeah.
But how do you impose those limits? As you said, like they're in their bedrooms or they're away from you, they're outside the house.
It's very, very, very hard. We are up against it. I often make an analogy with fat and sugar that, if we weren't wary about what we eat, we live in an obesogenic environment. So if you're not wary about what you're eating all the time, you will end up fat. That is the way it is going to be. It's kind of inevitable, unless you're one of those kind of freak metabolisms. Otherwise, you'll end up quite fat. It's the very same with screens. Unless you're wary and unless you're defensive, unless you put in some protections around your online life and around your children's online life, you will end up addicted and mindlessly on screens. And I would fear one day you'll hit 70, one day you'll hit 80 and think, I missed my life. I would genuinely fear that for a lot, especially kids. Where were you for your childhood? I was online. I wasn't out in rivers. I wasn't having a laugh. I was online.
Yeah, but that is today's world. And I do wonder whether it's just replaced something that kids did back then. Sitting in the corner of fields or something is, also, I won't say wasting time, but certainly
killing time.
Yeah.
You're right. And I'm not a dinosaur. I'm very fond of being online, and I think kids need it. They need it for social context. They need to have their online profile as such. I know they're very into it. That doesn't mean you don't have to be wary of it. It's just like, do I enjoy cake? Yeah, I love it. But you can't eat it all day, and you can't expect to be online equally all day and not think that's going to impact. And that's what it's a balance. I know that's very trite. I know it's a cliche, but it's genuinely, you'd have to be, if you were rearing kids these days, you would have to become wary of their online life, just like you'd have to become wary of their nutrition, because those two things are huge industries that are attacking children's well-being. And I think you'd have to be safe, protective over it.
And parents can take a safe harbour by saying, oh, I don't know anything at all about it.
Ah.
Cop out.
I totally think it's a cop-out. I think just learn it. I think there's enough out there. There's enough organisations out there that will walk you through it.
Podcasts like these.
Yeah, and iKydz do walk parents. I often give talks and I mention things like screen protection and online protection and things like that. And I might mention something like iKydz or somebody like that. And they will talk you through. They are open to those parents who say, I know nothing. But it's very convenient to sit back and say, I know nothing. It's very easy to say, oh, what can we do with the kids? It's a new life. And it's like, you could up your game a bit there. I think a bit of effort wouldn't kill
let's
people.
frighten those parents who aren't doing that, because you'd said it was the high road to anxiety. How does that manifest itself? What do you see, say, in your practice that these kids are suffering from, and how does that manifest itself?
In all seriousness, yeah, I do see anxiety. Anxiety is the most common mental health issue in Ireland. It's bypassed. It's more common than addiction or depression, and you would treat, a lot of people would treat anxiety with antidepressants, and that's why antidepressants are still shooting up as a product. But you would see kids who start off slightly anxious, who tip into severe anxiety. And when you see it, it's so sad, it's so heart-wrenchingly destructive to these kids' lives that you walk out, having been a psychotherapist, and I still obviously am, but when you walk out of certain sessions and you see the curve of their life and you can see how they overindulged or they were allowed to go on screens all the time and it spiraled out of control, because we all know how it's a 24-hour culture. It's incredibly difficult to have the self-control to stop scrolling. It's very, very difficult to get yourself off. And so they fall into it, and then when they become anxious, it's really sad to see it.
Now, with measles, I can see the spots. With anxiety, what do I see?
You know what's very extraordinarily noticeable among teenagers who come to me with anxiety is that you wouldn't see it, because they are very, very schooled in bringing it forward. They're very poised, they're very articulate, they look very sophisticated, and they have a natural way about themselves. You would never guess that they were anxious. And
Well, no, but you're loading the dice against mum and dad again there. How is mum and dad, how are they meant to know that Johnny or Mary...
The good thing, in fairness, a lot of the time, the parents, these days you could say, like, I'm on the side of the parents very strongly. And I do think that parents are so much more connected with their children than ever before. My generation, we didn't confide in our parents. We didn't talk to our parents. We didn't let our parents know our worries. This generation, they tend to. So I wouldn't worry all that much about children suffering secretly. Generally, children are suffering quite overtly. Even though their society, they're poised outside in school, they look very well. In the shopping centre, in the cafes, they look very well. They seem very poised. But at home, I find again and again, the parents know well the worries and the upset. So they let the guard down.
But how is it showing? I mean, do they lock themselves into their rooms, or...?
Anxiety generally manifests in extreme irritability, which isn't really known. You know what I mean? They're very, very irritable. They have tantrums. They refuse to do lots of things that they should probably do and they probably would enjoy. So they might have a meltdown about a school trip and end up missing it. And there'd be an awful lot of self-harming activities, and not just classic self-harming, but self-harming in the larger scale. Even digital self-harming, where they might go online and make a bit of a show of themselves online with some post. And you can see there's a self-harm aspect to it. But generally, with anxiety, they choke the fun out of life. They choke the happiness out of life. They ruin life on themselves by worrying and worrying and worrying about what they did when they met their friends, what's going to happen when they will meet their friends, and they worry themselves sick. And the parents are looking on, usually the parents are very connected with the children, looking on, just thinking, why are you wrecking things on yourself? You could have a great life. And it's awfully sad to see.
But that is, again, I'm still trying to see what physical manifestation to watch out for with the anxious person.
Well, I would emphasize you won't need to watch out for it as much as you might think. You will hear about it. I'd say you will hear about it very often with kids. But some kids, an awful lot of kids, a huge amount, come to me with panic attacks. So it spirals into a panic attack. So they might worry themselves sick and then literally they can't breathe. And, some parents, it's very interesting, some parents actually choose not to tell their children that it's a panic attack. I'd be very strong on the opinion that knowledge is power. And feeling like a panic attack, you feel you're dying. You actually think you're having a heart attack and you're going to die. And so you say, get me to a hospital. So not telling the children that they're having a panic attack and it's okay, to me would be quite a nerve-wracking thing to do. But that would be one. Nerves, irritability, tension, and continuous and constant worries.
The kids at all ages, forever, for back centuries, it is part of the growing process, isn't it? That you have irritable kids. It's that they do fight back. It's part of the growing up process, isn't it?
Yeah.
And therefore, how do you separate that from whatever's affecting them online? That they're growing up. There's an online element to it, but they are also physically and mentally growing up.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm not saying all roads, everything to do with online leads to anxiety. What I'm saying really is that too many children are coming to me for anxiety. Too many children are coming to me very worried about their online lives. And too many people are incessantly checking their online profiles and incessantly talking about it all the time, that it's hard not to associate the two together. I'm not saying it's only that, because in fairness, there's an awful lot of pressure on teenagers today. But an awful lot of the pressure is to do with appearance and to do with this kind of profile that we've almost all set upon ourselves to have a good profile. And these kids are digital natives and their profile is very strongly online, and it's a lot of pressure on them.
Now, you have been counselling kids for some years now. Is it getting worse?
Is it getting worse? It's very hard to answer that, because I don't want to, because, in a lot of levels it's getting so much better. We're so much closer to our parents than ever before. And children are so much more connected with themselves, and there's so much more self-awareness and less stigma around mental health, and huge inroads have been done, thankfully, for people who are gay and people who are transgender. So there's an awful lot of awareness and acceptance that might have never been. And then on the other side of things, there's a lot of pressure on kids to be very perfect. And there's an awful lot of pressure on people to do very well. And I think that's kicking in a big way on them.
Finally, what couple of rules would you impose, if I can use that word with kids, would you ask kids to observe if you were their parent?
That's an interesting question. I'm very low on rules. I'm not into rules, it's my nature. However, if I am a parent and I do impose rules, as in, if you want to veg out all day, you can, but you're not going to stay on screens all day. You know what I mean? An hour is fine. Maybe even 2 hours is fine some days, but no more than that. So I would have just a natural kind of common sense attitude to that. A lot of people key in how many hours they're going to allow the kid. They use some sort of safety or parental kind of controls on their online, and they would actually key in how many hours they're going to have per week, which I think is a great idea, because it gives the kid this idea, well, you can splurge on Sunday, but you won't get anything on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I think it's a good idea. I think it does kind of work for some kids and not so much for others. That would be a strong rule I'd have, but I would also have a rule with parents that they engage with their kids and they stay connected with their kids, and they don't look away when they see that the kid is distressed, because it's very, very hard on parents to see that your child isn't happy, and it's braver and more courageous to bite your lip and go there when you can see that they're feeling upset.
It's good to talk.
Yeah, it's very good to talk.
And Stella, it's a massive worry, but the sexualization of kids it's a massive problem.
It is. Especially girls, I have to say that girls, it goes from being cute little girls and they're pink and they're, it's gorgeous and sparkles, and it turns sexual too early for them. they're often, it'd be very common, let's say musically, the dancing, and the kids, they're innocently dancing, but it's quite a sexualized dance. And that starts, so they're kind of making sexual moves. It's kind of shocking to see because you're looking at the kids realizing there's no sexuality behind this 9-year-old, and yet the moves are extraordinarily sexual by anybody's.
And they're picking this up online.
Yeah, well, it's been driven. It's been driven online, and so it's very shaped online. And an awful lot of girls, quite young, that kind of the pout, the famous pout, which thankfully has kind of gone. But that was a very sexual look, and that's kind of nearly representative of what we're talking about, that girls are being asked to kind of portray themselves sexually before they're sexual. And then when they are sexual, it's ramped up. So an awful lot of girls, an awful lot of flirting. It's quite sweet, but the flirting that they do is very much screen-based flirting. So a boy might, text the girl, "Can I kiss you?" and things like that. But therefore, the images, they communicate in images, children these days, because it's such an image-based culture, because of the screens. So they won't say, "I'm going for a coffee." They'll do a picture of a coffee or whatever, a hot chocolate. And therefore, when you're flirting, an awful lot of them have, taken their top off before they've kissed. Do you follow me? That it's gone the wrong way. It's not physical first, it's virtual first. And yet it's really quite sexual before they've even done something that I would consider really quite innocent. So in a way, it's quite topsy-turvy. So it's extraordinarily heated before they've done anything physical. So those physical, awkward, clumsy kind of fumblings are sped up. And that's a bit of an issue, I find, for children.
And if they don't participate, if I can use that word, are they then kind of frowned upon? They're not in the gang, which then leads me neatly to cyberbullying.
Yeah, and that's where, again and again, the kids need social context. They need their screens, like we need our screens. As far as, complete vetoes and banning them, while it might make the parent feel a lot clearer, it can be quite difficult for the kid who doesn't have a screen and everybody else does. And I'm not saying when they're 8 or 9, I'm more talking about when they're teenagers and stuff, that they do need some level of social context. And yet, bullying can begin very easily once they have screens 24 hours a day.
Just pick you up there on the screens at the age. What age do you think a child should be given a smartphone or might be given a smartphone?
It's the $1 million question. I would not be in favour, without being extreme, because I do understand there are contexts. There are contexts in different things. I don't think they're really, able for a smartphone until they're about 13. I don't think, phone off the go. But a smartphone is a different context.
Stella, if you give a kid a phone, that they'll just throw it in the bin, unless it's a smartphone.
Yes. Well, I think they can suck it up, frankly. If they're 10 years old, it's like, well, mommy rules, back off.
Yes, and then they go to school and there are 20 or 30 kids in class and he or she is the only one without a smartphone.
It's so interesting that you should say that, because I give a lot of talks in schools, and some schools will proudly say to me, primary schools, I talk in both primary and secondary, but the primary schools might say, we're a smartphone-free school. We don't do smartphones here. Other schools have your reaction, which is, are you mad? Of course they're going to have smartphones. And it's quite, one kid gets it, and then another kid, there'll always be one or two who break the rules who get it. But if the core kids get it, it spreads like wildfire. And I don't buy it. I don't buy, actually, that every kid needs a smartphone. I just don't. The legal age.
Your power.
Yeah. But sure, if we were Pester Power, we'd feed them in McDonald's every day and we'd give them chocolate all day, every day. If we're going to give in to Pester Power, sure, just leave them off with their McDonald's. On some level, parents do have a role of guidance. And we know how deep the addiction goes. I'm not saying that they won't have access to laptops, to the tablets. Some of them do. I would also think that an awful lot of parents on some level think that they're great because the kid doesn't have a smartphone but the kid has a tablet. I just think screens in general on some level need to be controlled. There needs to be some protective measures in there, and you can't just say, sure, Pester Power let you off.
You mentioned sexualization earlier on, and of course that brings us to online grooming, which of course, yet again, I suppose there are so many things that parents worry about online, but that's another one.
It's huge. It happens an awful lot, I find, with you know, I hate pinning them on specific kind of websites, but things like, video gaming, an awful lot of boys, an awful lot of certain, there's a big kind of hoo-ha really about Fortnite at the moment, and there's a few different kind of games that's very, very open and very easy for predatory adults.
You should explain that Fortnite is the name of a game.
Yeah, and that an awful lot of kids are being, what's the word? Lured into conversations with adults that aren't appropriate, definitely led by predatory adults. And sometimes there's specifics where, like, I would know a group of boys and they were lured into this whole, they thought the guy who was running the kind of the game was this Steve Jobs figure. He was, really high in Dublin with his, his gaming connections, and he was going to get them all fabulous jobs in gaming world and stuff like that. And he wasn't. He was a predator. And he had them lured into, they were going to pretend to stay in each other's houses, and they were going to stay, in the end, they were going to stay in his. Thankfully, one of the boys, because we are very connected with our children these days, one of the boys told his mother, and the thing got stopped that night. They were going to go and stay with him that night. But there's an awful lot of predatory men who are luring boys, and they get the boys to do sexual things because it's kind of easy to get a 13 or a 14-year-old boy to do something sexual. And then they kind of have the boys over a barrel then.
Because that's used for extortion and or for...
You have to give me more images and more, and they kind of lure them, they play with them, they flirt with them, they bring them on, they use pornographic kind of material to get their interest. It's incredibly insidious and clever in its way of luring them. And they do the girls as well with other websites. You're so gorgeous. So many girls, because they're doing these pictures all the time, they're incredibly vain. And these girls have been allowed to be vain, allowed to kind of do 7 million pictures of themselves. And then somebody says, you're so gorgeous. And with the cyberbullying as well, there's so much emphasis on their looks. And so that an awful lot of them, that's what they go at. Look at the state of you. That's how they bully them with... You're not that gorgeous, your nose is rotten, your skin is rotten, whatever. That they bully them with the looks, which is the deepest core of any teenager these days.
How widespread is that grooming?
It's probably not as widespread as maybe some parents would think. I would say cyberbullying is a much bigger issue. I would say it's a lot more harmful to a lot more children than grooming, but it's so devastating when it happens. That's why there's so much talk about it. While the cyberbullying happens to nearly every child that I hear, and it falls into it. It's very often they're a group of friends, let's say a WhatsApp group, and they're all friends, and then some power crazy kid decides to do their own WhatsApp group and leave one kid out of that WhatsApp group. So you're in on the group that are talking about Saturday night, but you're not in on the group who are talking about Friday night. Very subtle and continuous and exclusionary, and it's really, really harmful to kids, and they feel so paranoid because they don't know what are the online conversations that are going on. If you're in a group and everybody's talking, you kind of know if you're being sidelined. If you're online and everybody's talking, you don't know if they're having separate. So one girl was coming to me and she was saying, I guess they were having a separate group as I was talking to them because there was pauses between the answers. So I thought they were going off to the other group, talking about it and coming back to me. We're talking 5 seconds, that's all, not long pauses. That allowed this girl to get so paranoid, and she was correct, that there was a whole other WhatsApp group happening. How paranoid and stressful is anxiety like?
It is. It's nuts, really. But what chance has a parent who's completely excluded from a WhatsApp group, besides their child who's being excluded from a WhatsApp group, what chance has a parent got to even know that's going on?
The parent can guide the child. They can guide the child by putting in protective measures so that they're not online all the time, so that effectively they're forced to meet their friends face to face, and that they give themselves. It's interesting, the more rules you give in the physical life of a teenager, the more likely they're going to get into trouble online, and that's fact. That's actually research based. And so give them some physical, let them go to the disco, let them meet their boyfriend. I would argue very strenuously that it will be more natural and more authentic than paranoid conversations deep into the night, which frankly goes a little bit hysterical quite quickly.
One thing we haven't touched on is gambling. Do you see much kids gambling?
I don't, but I see an awful lot of young adults gambling. I see an awful lot of, they say they started young, but like 16, 17, 18, And then it's definitely a huge issue when they hit their 20s. Young boys, it's a huge...
Primarily boys?
Yeah, no, I am kind of, what's the word, given to generalisations. So it seems to me to be boys. Girls, it's vanity. Boys, it's a more addictive habit, whether it's porn or gambling or whatever.
I suppose to round off, what both of us are saying is internet good, but controlled internet very good.
Yeah, that's bang on. You nailed it with that.
Stella O'Malley, thank you so much.
Thank you.